Sound check 1 2 3. Sound check 1 2 3.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the General Issues Committee Budget Meeting, Public Delegation Day. A reminder for folks on the floor and in the gallery to please switch any devices you may have to a non-audible function. This day comes after the Buffalo Bills win and the Toronto Argos win. So celebrate if you must, mourn if you need to. Elsie McCrae, are there any changes to today's agenda?
Yes, Chair. There are added communication items 3.1A, which is correspondence respecting the 2025 budget from Brian Peerview, Government Relations Consultant, CAA, South Central Ontario. There is for the delegation request for today respecting the 2025 budget. There is one that has been withdrawn, item A, Carl Andrus, and there are 4 added delegations, E, Jacqueline Wilson, F, Stacey Easton, G, Jeff Nevin, and H, Claire Freeman.
Thank you so much. It is moved by Councillor Danko, seconded by Councillor Kazar to approve this amended agenda. Please indicate your vote. Just put your thumb.
Councillor Francis, are you able to vote? Thank you.
Thank you. That carries 16-0. I failed to note that we have quorum for this meeting. Joining me in council chambers today, that carries 16-0. Joining me in council chambers today, Councillor Jackson, Councillor McMeekin, Councillor Wang, Councillor Spadafora, Mayor Horvath, Councillor Danko, Councillor Beattie, Councillor Kazar, Councillor Cameron Kretsch, Councillor Brad Clark, Councillor Alex Wilson. Online, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Taddison, Councillor Nan, Councillor Francis. Any declarations of interest this afternoon? Seeing none. On the communication item from Brian Purview, a government relations consultant with CAA South Central, can I have a mover and a seconder to receive? Councillor Kazar, seconded by Councillor Wang. Any notation on that? Seeing none.
Councillor Taddison, are you in favor?
Thumbs up from
Thank you.
Councillor Taddison. That carries 16-0. Thank you. We have delegation requests respecting the 2025 budget. May I have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Spadafora, Councillor Wang, to approve the requests for today's meeting.
Councillor Pauls, are you able to vote? Thank you.
Wonderful. That carries 16-0. On to delegations. Members of committee, we have 7 delegations to hear today, lucky 7, and we'll take one motion after the last speaker to receive all the delegations. Members and delegates are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members, if you are requesting additional time, you will need to advise the chair and seek permission of this body in order to advance beyond that time. Okay, I think we're going to go right to the delegates. I'd like to call we're at 5.1 on your program. I'd like to call on Tom Cooper and Ted Hildebrandt of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction and Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton. They are in person and joining us momentarily.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And today, the Ontario Living Wage Network, working with communities across the province, released new living wage rates for a number of communities, including Hamilton. And we're very pleased to announce that Hamilton's updated living wage rate is, drum roll please, $21.30, and that's a reflection of an increase of about 50 cents from last year. Unlike the provincially mandated minimum wage, the living wage rate is an evidence-based calculation and reflects what workers need to earn on their jobs to ensure that they can meet basic needs, certainly, but also importantly, participate in community. Ted Hildebrandt from Social Planning and Research Council will outline some of the specifics that went into Hamilton's calculation in just a moment. But I wanted to chat a little bit about the living wage movement and what it means for us here in Hamilton. A living wage ensures that workers can meet their basic needs, such as housing, food, transportation, and childcare, and still have enough left over to participate in community life. It's about making sure that those who contribute to the vibrancy of our city aren't forced to choose between paying the rent and putting food on the table. Here in Hamilton, where we see the rising cost of living outpacing incomes, the living wage is not just a goal, it's a necessity. It's a tool to address poverty and inequality while promoting economic stability. When workers earn enough to live, they spend locally supporting Hamilton's businesses, creating jobs, and strengthening our local economy. We've seen forward-looking employers across the community voluntarily adopt living wages, including new living wage employers such as Neighbor to Neighbor, which have just recently certified. They're demonstrating leadership and care for their employees. These businesses have seen the benefits firsthand in reduced turnover, higher morale, improved productivity. Paying a living wage isn't just the right thing to do, it's a smart investment. Now, we have an opportunity to lead by example as a municipality as well. So I'd like to urge Hamilton City Council to get behind the living wage movement as council has been over the last decade, really, as at the forefront of this movement. We'd like to encourage those doing business with the city, so the procurement opportunities that the city looks for, to also pay a living wage to their employees too. Because public dollars should reflect public values such as dignity, fairness, and community well-being. And by embracing this standard, we can demonstrate that we are a city that cares about its people and is willing to take real steps to address the challenges they face. I'll now turn it over to Ted to talk a little bit about the specific living wage calculation here in Hamilton.
Thank you. So as Tom mentioned, you heard the new rate, $21.30, and this image that you see up here is just a graphic showing some of the elements that were used to calculate the living wage. And of course, I'd also make you aware of the difference between the minimum wage, which is $17.20, set in October, still the $4.10 difference between the minimum wage and our living wage. And so to calculate the living wage, it's determine the cost of a basket of basic goods and services for 3 types of families, 2 parents with 2 children, a single parent with a child, and a single adult. And I think I'll just draw your attention to those items that we talk about a lot, which are housing and food costs. And so the Ontario Living Wage Network uses CMHC data, and we know that that's conservative in terms of rents. But we've seen the CMHC average market rent in Hamilton almost double since 2010, while inflation has increased by about 36%. So that means if a rent increased by inflation since 2010, we would see an average rent of about $988 a month. But now we're seeing about $1,500 according to the CMHC, and we know that's even conservative compared to what you see on the market. And so this is, and according to some analysis of the CMHC data, that's a larger increase than seen in any other Ontario community here in Hamilton. And in food costs, we've seen, food costs continue to increase, again, slow down inflation, about 2.4% between September 2023 and 24, but it's still above the overall inflation rate of 1.6%. And food costs are taken from Nutritious Food Basket that are calculated from our local public health units. And again, we've seen in reports from Food Banks Canada the increase in the number of people that are accessing food banks. And so I think this is a really critical item to also consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Cooper and Hildebrandt. Are there any questions for our speakers? There is. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Can we put that slide back up, the last one? Sorry, Clerk. Not sure if we can do that. So I'm just seeking clarification, Chair, on how they make the calculations. It spoke to an aggregate of 3 household types, and you're choosing the household type as like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom?
That's correct.
And they're all rentals?
Yes.
Okay. And so,
So this is the example here of the annual shelter costs expenses that would be rent and also costs like insurance and utilities. So it's all the shelter costs.
and so all of those.
And you can see Hamilton at the bottom there.
Yeah, and we're fitting right in there, kind of in the middle, really.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to understand exactly where you were pulling the numbers from.
Sure.
I got the basic mathematics, but
Yes.
wanting to ensure that the aggregate wasn't including Vancouver, places like that.
No, this is just including our community.
Thank you. Thank you very much for what you do.
You're welcome. There are no further speakers. Thank you for participating in this budget process. Thank you. Up next, Manny Figueredo, the YMCA of Hamilton, Burlington, Brantford, for an in-person delegation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Glad to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Council. I'll be delegating here with my colleague Genevieve Hildash, VP of Health, Fitness, Aquatics, and Residents, and I'm here with my 2 colleagues, Nikki Glowacki, Chief Operating Officer, and Sean McKillop, Senior Vice President of Communications. Just want to begin with updates. So following the devastating fire on July 22nd, the residence has made some significant recovery, with all residents returning to either their room or transition to permitted housing. And Genevieve will go over those numbers now, 129 men back in their spaces. The restoration efforts allowed for key floors to open, and thank you for many of the councillors, many who have visited prior to the fire and who've reached out to provide their support as well. We are actively working with insurance and looking at what the restoration will look like for the 3rd floor to bring it back online. But as we restore, there are many other partners. We know that we want to transition it to a different type of program, not under the Landlord-Tenant Act, but a transitional best practice program, and that's hence why we're here today as well. The progress to date is because of the incredible response. I want to thank some people. First of all, the City of Hamilton Crisis Response Team was incredible. The Red Cross our donors, volunteers, and incredible staff. They moved from crisis mode back to strategy within 2 months. We also want to thank the city. To date, you've given 28,000 plus approved through the City Enrichment Fund, which allowed us to hire and prepare a space for clinical services for shelter with the Shelter Health Network. Now that's half a day a week and to implement, but half a day a week is a start, but nowhere near meets the needs that we're experiencing with the men that are in our residence. With that, we are here today, a part of the budget process, to put in front of you an ask on an annual basis of $350,000, and we'll break that down. But this will cover staffing, mental health and addiction support, food security, some capital repairs, but really it's around that wraparound support. And what the fire definitely highlighted was the intense needs, mental health supports, addictions that many men have and need critical support for. Since our last delegation, we've also engaged in other community discussions around public safety in our precinct, and want to thank our police services for the support they've provided in partnership. But we continue to work through those. And I'm going to pass right now to Genevieve Hildash, our Vice President of Health and Fitness and Residents, to share more about the specifics of the men who we are privileged to serve. And hopefully I can click the slide here.
Great, thank you, Manny. I'd like to begin by telling you about two of our residents, Jason and Scott. One you'll see pictured here on the slide. During the fire, Jason, living with COPD, was redirecting smoke with fans and waiting safely to escape. Another resident, Scott, has been living with us for 8 years and faced upheaval, but found renewed strength in community, finding new friends as we mitigated through the fire and the aftermath. Their experiences remind us that housing is more than just a roof. It's a lifeline where hope is built, recovery is possible, and lives are transformed. Jason and Scott represent a very typical profile for us at the YMCA Men's Residence, a place that serves individuals with complex needs and diverse background. Although we're situated in Ward 2, one important thing of note is that many of the individuals come from multiple wards throughout the city. Our average resident is 52, though ages range from our youngest being 18 and the oldest being 82. Many lack access to primary care, in fact 90% of them, and 75% of those with us have mental health and addiction challenges. Many are facing psychosocial and physical disabilities. Serving 129 men currently with a capacity for 174, considering that we have not reactivated the third floor yet and still working through insurance with that. The residence is one of Hamilton's few underfunded solutions for homelessness, and the monthly wait list for us of 220 underscores the critical need for sustainable support. Our model prioritizes stable housing as the foundation for addressing mental health, addiction, and other challenges. By offering individualized support, we prevent homelessness and reduce strain on community resources. This model has proven effective, yet without consistent funding, the YMCA residence remains vulnerable to rising cost, increasing health complexities, and still recovering from the pandemic. Our commitment to Hamilton's visions to end chronic homelessness runs deep. We're advocating for operational funding to meet the complex needs of residents. That includes infrastructure upgrades to meet modern housing standards and wraparound supports, as Manny shared. I'll now ask Manny to come back to share our immediate needs.
Delegates, you're at the 5-minute mark. May I ask if you have anything of length?
I just want to show the last slide. Thank you for the time. So,
Please proceed.
oh, thank you. The last slide just highlights again the request we're putting in. So we're happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the delegation.
Thank you for your participation. Councillor Spatafora, I will recognize for a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First off, to both of you, thank you for you and your team and everything you do at the YMCA. I'm sure it's appreciated by your residents, but also residents throughout our city. My first question, and might be the only one, do you currently receive annual funding from the City of Hamilton?
No, we do not. We've got the city enrichment funding, which was about $28,000 we apply for, but nothing beyond that.
Okay, that's good for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Good afternoon, Budget Chair Maureen Wilson. Thank you. Good to see you again, Manny, and nice to meet you, Genevieve. Just 2 or 3 questions for clarification, please. I was intrigued by your profile of 18-year-olds at the young age up to 82-year-olds. Can you give me some indication as to who that 18-year-old might be, who the 82-year-old might be? In other words, Budget Chair Wilson, is the 18-year-old hypothetically an escape from a bad domestic situation at home, isn't doing well in school, and at the opposite end of the age spectrum, the 82-year-old, possible rent eviction? Just maybe help me understand a little bit of the profiles further, if you could, please. CEO Figueredo, please.
Yeah, I'll go first. I probably wouldn't be able to speak about this until the recent fire, because all of us got to know 170 men quite deeply. But it's a combination of 3 things around environment. So maybe the environment in terms of their home environment, what situation has caused them to be homeless or need our support. Economics, a third of the, I would say, are there because it's just so deeply affordable at $450 a month. And if they can't afford it, we subsidize over $200,000 a year through generous donors. And the third is experience, whether some experience in life which caused trauma that forced them to turn to addiction. So the profile is either one of those or an intersection of all 3. So I would say environment, economics, and experience. So that's what we're seeing. And I would say 40, 30 years ago, you would have seen most people are there simply because of transitioning, economics, cheap place to stay, and then now they can find another place to go to. That has shifted completely.
Appreciate that. A follow-up question, Budget Chair Wilson. You put up 75% face mental health and addiction challenges. Now, I would like to think we need the YM in an even greater capacity in our community, especially with what my residents have experienced in neighborhood parks, but some of the ones that have such severe mental addictions and narcotics addictions. Can you help me understand the type of programs you help to help those that are facing these type of addictions? Vice President Haddish, please.
Yeah, thank you, and it's a great question. I think we're seeing that challenge more than ever, and one of the reasons that we've come here is that we don't have the wraparound operational support to do what we know is needed for the quality and service and the dignity that these men deserve. Gratefully, we've been able to partner through, all the partners in the community, including, St. Joe's, who's really stepped up for us in the fire around some case management. So there's a willingness from the partners, but what we're lacking is the funding to be able to execute on really some best practice.
And hence that 350,000 ask is hypothetically what that would go towards. Last question, Budget Chair Wilson, the 36 deaths, sadly and tragically since 2000, again, possibly give us some indication, taking their own lives, suicide. Was it something that just self-esteem was lacking and no hope for the future? Again, just some indication as to what tragically led to 36 deaths in 4 years. And that's my last question, Budget Chair Wilson.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would say a mix in that period of time. One of the things that we know the Code Red Series taught us is around postal codes can be a driver of health. And so what we would see is while men living in our residence, the average age being 52, health conditions are reduced. And so we're seeing people dying of, could be heart attacks, could be general poor health conditions at a much younger age than what we might see. And we have seen a number of overdoses as well.
Thank you for everything you folks do at the Y. Thank you, Budget Chair Wilson.
Thank you. A number of speakers are awaiting, just to give you an indication to my colleagues, Councillor Nan, Beattie, Clark, Pauls, and Mayor Horvath. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through you, Budget Chair. Thank you both for your presentation, for your years of work and service, especially in light of the rising crisis around housing access and also the ever-increasing needs in our community and across the country around mental health and addiction supports. I was wondering if you could just share with committee, given the ask for annualized funding, and I can completely empathize and deeply understand the structural systemic nature in which supportive housing and wraparound supports is the key to succeeding transition towards permanent housing. I'm wondering how your conversations are going provincially and federally in terms of those funding envelopes, specifically around mental health and addiction services and those wraparound supports, please, and thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, and I'll preface that. So we are having the conversations, and they're just as challenging, but we're going to each level of government to talk about grant opportunities around the wraparound supports. And I'll highlight, prior to the fire, I wear this pin that says "Why Saves Lives," and Councillor Jackson talked about the number of deaths, and I said, we're not doing justice. We're putting a roof over their heads, and I've learned that why they like going there. One of the reasons is the relationship with staff who do incredible work, but also because they have their own individual space. And when the fire happened and they had to be out and about in gym on cots, then I saw the reality of what shelter systems deal with on a day-to-day. We've explored, and we're going to be exploring further. Prior to this fire, we went to Waterloo to see the House of Friendship, met with Jonathan Neufeld around the 100 men that he has living in a shelter care model. And that model, when I talked to Ontario Health about it, said it's an exemplary flagship program. The return on investment on that is because the healthcare clinic is embedded within the 100-man residence with every support funded by the province and the healthcare system, who realizes if we can have the clinic within there, they're not lining up at the emergency rooms and taking up beds. And so that model is really called a third from the region of Waterloo, a third from the province or the healthcare system from Waterloo, and a third from donors. So stay tuned. We are going to be thinking about what this looks like, why we want the third floor to begin to play and what that space would look like. And the outcomes from that program to what they used to be are incredible. Not only did they transition them for men to find residents, but also back to employment with a safe injection site right within the model with the clinic. So these are the discussions we're having with the province and more to come. Thank you for the question.
I really appreciate a little line of sight there, and thank you both again for your delegation.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I just took note of the date, Manny. It's coming up in about the 10th year that we've known each other, and I don't know how that happened. Just a quick moment of levity. I do have an actual question. I did see the slide towards the end of the presentation, and I felt like maybe that last portion of your presentation was truncated some. I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to elaborate on that last slide in terms of, I'll use air quotes for the ask of what it is that you're hoping to accomplish with council in the 2025 year.
Thank you for that. I think the questions just were asked previously. I extended my answer to get my message out about what we're trying to accomplish beyond the short-term vision and where we want to go. But thank you for that. So I've answered, I think, and got the messages I wanted to get out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Chair, so to clarify, so I understand, it's a $350,000 ask for the 2025 city budget. And I believe I heard that it was intended that this would be a part of a three-way split. Can I confirm that?
Delegate Figueredo, could you please confirm?
To confirm, not for this ask, no. What you heard around a three-way split is the example of the shelter care model I spoke about what our vision is moving forward. But for this ask, it's $350,000 for the city budget.
So may I inquire then, what are the asks for the province and the federal government?
So a lot of the asks from the federal government and province are to do with our capital, how will we sustain the model and with the bricks and mortars, because the building is very old. But in addition, we also put in asks for mental health care supports. During the pandemic, the Ontario Trillium Fund came forward and provided some support for mental caseworker to be there for mental health and social worker. It disappeared during COVID, so we continue to go back on that ask. So this is currently for the model we have now. The other ask is for the model we want to go forward with.
So the $350,000 would pay for a nurse, social worker? What exactly would the city be providing the funds for? What services would the men receive?
Thank you. The request for the 350 would be direct support services to the men, things like social worker, mental health and addiction, health support, case management for them to get things like file their taxes and to get identification, all the things, and also collaborate through. What we're finding is there's some support needed to actually navigate through the system. And so it's quite complex to allow someone to try to do that independently. So there's a lot of case management needed to work through that. In addition, what we're seeing are additional needs for security supports, which would be of no surprise to what's happening in the downtown core.
And the 350,000, it basically sounds like you're going to use that funding to create a supportive housing model, Chair. Can I get confirmation that that is the exact intent?
Yes, that is the intent.
But you're not to be clear, Chair, they're not asking for any money from the province on that matter.
Could you kindly confirm and clarify, please, delegates?
Yeah, no, I think maybe to separate the ask, there's some current emerging needs that we've seen come out of, that we saw existing before the fire have definitely emerged and become more evident throughout the fire for the current model and enhancing the current model. As we look to the future of our downtown facility, we are actively exploring new best evidence case models, which would be, as Manny alluded to, we're looking through 3 different levels for support for a future vision. So the current ask is for the current need that we're seeing.
But to be clear, the ask is only of the city and not of the province.
For this specific ask, we are still going, actively working through grant applications and through different levels of government to see whatever support we can get.
That's helpful in the context that I've been trying to argue for some time now. There should be supports from the province, given that we're spending a significant amount of money on homelessness and they're spending 28.6 million. So I appreciate the fact that you are requesting support from the province on that. And to be clear, the 350 would be our portion, and any requested funding that you're getting from the province would be above that 350.
To be clear, we've invited MPs who have come to visit and MPPs to visit our men's residence over and over because it's more powerful to see it in action. And several of them have taken us up on the visit.
Has Minister Lumsden visited? Yes, he has.
For the people who are watching, it's important to have a verbal affirmation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, he has. He's visited and he's met us 3 times around it.
That's very hopeful because he did tour Indowell when Minister Clark was the Municipal Affairs Minister, and I was with them, and he seemed supportive of supporting housing. So that's very positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you, Manny. I've been to the Y, the men's Y, and I was so impressed what a great work you're doing to help these men. My question is, I was really taken back that the 28,000 out of the enrichment fund provided a half a day a week to help them. 129 men live there, and yet we're only providing a half a day a week. So I understand the funding that you're asking, the 350, because it's so important. My question is, before the fire, you were helping people. What changes you want now? Because it's evident we see the need more often. What change of what you're doing after the fire?
Would you like to summarize again? Thank you.
Sure. I think we've learned a lot from the immediate fire. And since that time, it's been active I would say, very intense by the staff on finding permanent rehousing and the efforts that go into case management. Sometimes it's transitioning people to long-term care if they've been screened for that. So we'd like to see an enhanced model that we can do it based on the needs and the more complex challenges that we're seeing, and not have it limited by, I've only got 4 hours worth of support for this week. So I think it's enhancing that as well as the ongoing issue of food security and safety measures to make sure that the men can live in dignity.
Thank you for that. I was struck by, you talked about Jason and Scott. You said that Scott lives there, still lives there, I assume, for 8 years. Do you, is that the longest stay of a person that needs housing?
No, the longest stay we've got is actually someone that has been there longer than I work for the Y. So he's been with us for 30 years, is our longest staying resident.
And
I
so,
might say he's, complex health needs, has had an amputation since staying with us, managing diabetes, but because people know who he is and there's care and trust in knowing he's got a community there at the Y, he's chosen to stay there.
That's amazing. So this is more like permanent housing for this gentleman, for something. Do you get in contact with housing first to see whether they could transition to a home or to an apartment by themselves or whatever? Or you just let them stay there? I mean, to be there 30 years is a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we work actively with is to build trust and relationships to help navigate the system and allow people a choice where they may move throughout the system. So sometimes there's lots of choices available and sometimes there's very few.
Yeah, I just want to say how impressed I was, how the people, I saw the rooms, I saw the rooms and their bed.
For questions at this
So,
point.
so I really was impressed, and I think for mental health, my last question is, I know that we are providing 192 shelter beds, and we are sending money to the shelter bed. Are you considered one of the shelter beds that we're sending people to?
No, we're not.
And I'm just wondering, I'm wondering why not, if there is room, because it seems like it's a great place for men to be. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Pauls. Mayor Horvath.
So thanks very much. A couple of my questions were covered by Councillor Nan and Councillor Clark. But one of the things I wonder about is whether the local Ontario Health Team, the GIN, is aware of your services, aware of your need, whether you've approached them at all for some kind of funding support and or recommendation for the Ministry of Health to fund the services. I just, I find it's frustrating for our table to continue to pick up the pieces when the provincial government refuses to pick up the pieces that should be under their auspice, and that is mental health and addictions. It's not something that should be funded from the municipal tax base, and yet we find ourselves always being the ones, because these are people in our community. We understand the need, very much so. But what I think one of the things that Councillor Clark was referring to, and I'm sorry to speak for you, Councillor Clark, I don't mean to, is that you keep, every time we have these conversations, you raise that very issue. And so just get an understanding of what's your approach when it comes to the GIN, the Greater Hamilton Health Network, or Family Health Team, or whatever you want to call it. It used to be the LIN, or the Ontario Health Team, rather, locally.
Yeah, no, I think they're all great suggestions and work that we know is really important to do in looking at the different levels of support in government. Our immediate need coming out of the fire, we saw critical needs happening, and I will say, the GIN stepped up to help getting connected with Ontario Health and subsequently into St. Joe's too. And I think we really started to do a deep dive on the intense case management that's needed. So that was really beneficial. And I will say there's interest in those partners in continuing in a collaborative model, because we know that we can't do anything independent. And a successful model has to be cross-sector and with partners, and there's an eagerness for that. What we have to make sure is that we can continue to be operational to allow for those the future vision to happen. And I think that's the question, what we're seeing immediate needs. The staff right now have been really prioritizing getting people homes and making sure they're in. And so I think we'd look to the city as well to help support in conversations around how we can work collaboratively, because we want to be part of the solution. And we'll need, cross-sectoral approach to do that. But the conversations are active. And it's one of the silver linings we had coming out of the fire is, the community support and outreach that came together. We just need to make sure we can get to a point that we can allow a future vision to happen.
Thank you. Councillor Danko, could you please take the chair as the Vice Chair of Budget, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. It's very difficult in a 5-minute delegation, I can appreciate, to try and reveal all the particulars. You can certainly hear from my colleagues an interest in trying to understand those details, and also some of the formalities in your ask to those bodies that are constitutionally responsible for the delivery of health and housing. My question through Chair Danko is, has this request been formally submitted to city staff? What is its status at present?
The request to city staff, you mean? I have not put the request to city staff. I have met with Marty Clucking, the city manager, let her know that we have put this request. She did come to tour as part of her onboarding. I did let her know that this was something that we had asked before. We haven't received it, and so most recently I met her last week to let her know that I would be coming here regarding this ask.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, just to clarify, the 350, that would be a forever annual amount tied to inflation, or can you clarify, or is it a one-time ask through the chair?
So it is an annual ask tied to inflation, because to sustain it, and like any other program, if we start 1 year and not able to sustain it, I'd rather not provide it, to be frank. So it is an annual ask, and we would tie it to inflation because of the costs associated with staffing. So thank you for asking that.
You're welcome. Thank you. So I imagine as a budget committee, we'll be looking forward to receiving those details at some point in our delegation so we can have a good discussion. Thank you. Thank you for your delegation and your participation today.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark?
I'm curious, how is staff going to deal with this request? Request should not be, I know they did it as a delegate, I get that, that's completely legitimate, but it's not really a grant request today. There has to be some documentation. So I'm trying to understand, who would the Y reach out to provide the documentation with their request?
Councillor Clark, is it okay if we save that question, because we may have other delegates with similar asks, and we can come back and I'll recognize you at the conclusion? It's a really good question.
Yep, thank you very much, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Any further questions or comments? Thank you. Councillor Crutch.
Is it okay to make comments at the end of delegations if they're not specifically questions for delegates? Would you rather wait till the very end?
I would prefer to wait, but if you feel strongly about it, I'm here all afternoon.
Yeah, I didn't have a question for the delegate, but just wanted to say that, yeah, I recognize this is a Ward 2 institution. And what we've done here in the past has brought forward motions to offer annualized funding for certain groups, not for others. There still seems to be some fuzziness here in terms of how that all works, because we're having folks come here. There maybe not be a process that they understand completely on the other side of things. So just looking forward for some clarity in that before the budget process gets concluded, because we only have so much money to go around. It's obviously important that these folks have support for the services they're looking to provide to people in the community. And they're obviously providing a huge range of services to people who live downtown. So it's a conflict and it's a difficult issue, but just want to raise that and say that appreciate the delegation and hopefully get some clarity about that as the budget process moves along.
Thank you, along with the Housing Sustainability Investment Roadmap, which is to guide and provide a methodology for these deliberations. Thank you. Next, any further comments or questions? Seeing none. The next delegate is virtual, Stuart Klasinga from Acorn Hamilton. Is Stuart Klasinga with us?
Hello, you got my name right.
I've been practicing all year.
I appreciate it. It was perfect. My grandmother couldn't have done better herself, so.
Oh, well, mark that on my resume, please. Okay, whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, councillors, and staff. My name is Stuart Klasinga. I'm a tenant in Ward 5, Vice Chair of Environment Hamilton's Board of Directors, and Chair of Acorn Hamilton's East End Chapter, whom I'm delegating on behalf of today. I appreciate the time for the delegation. 2 years ago, this past September, Acorn Hamilton launched our Extreme Heat campaign right outside your doors. Our campaign has since caught the attention of community groups across the country, several of which have adopted it as a template for their own campaigns. 8 months later, the Public Health Committee voted, and this council ratified unanimously to direct staff to implement a maximum temperature bylaw to protect tenants from the heat, garnering national attention as the first municipality in the country to do so. Then this past September, we saw a staff report and recommendation that fell far short of our expected target. While we acknowledge that this recommendation never made it to council and continues to be worked on, we want to address some of the arguments or premises that were being presented. It can't be done. It's too complicated. It'll be bad for the environment. The province is already taking care of the issue. It's not worth our resources to focus on this. So first off, it can be done. Hamilton, along with practically every other municipality in the country, has the proof of this in their existing temperature bylaws requiring adequate heat through the winter. If you were to copy Hamilton's existing adequate heat bylaw and change the term heating appliance to cooling appliance, along with a couple of other obvious changes like the prescribed temperature and the enforced date range, you would have a bylaw that meets the demands of all of those who have delegated over the past couple years. And we believe the spirit of the motion that council unanimously ratified back in May of 2022. Laws requiring landlords to provide heat in the winter didn't always exist, but today they are ubiquitous and an expected standard. They are so because we acknowledged the fact that some people would weigh the value of their pocketbooks heavier than the comfort, safety, or even lives of some of their fellow human beings. It takes no imagination to think that there were some elected officials or staff who balked at these ideas when they were first proposed. If we could hear their arguments today, I wonder what we might think of them. Would we see any merit at all in them? So another issue, there is proposed legislation that touches on tenants' use of air conditioners. This legislation has yet to be passed, and it hardly goes far enough. The proposed bill would only ensure a tenant's right to use their own air conditioner. Tenants do not have the same options as landlords when it comes to selection of cooling appliances. The most efficient, convenient, and long-term cost-effective options are not available to tenants. If we are concerned about environmental impacts or a tenant's ability to afford the cost to run a cooling appliance or ensuring the highest quality of life for tenants, then we must compel landlords to install permanent cooling appliances and incentivize the most energy-efficient and long-term cost-effective options available. Robust protections from the heat for tenants will become as ubiquitous as our existing protections from the cold. We believe it is only a matter of time. Hamilton can either lead on this issue, as it has done from the start, and follow through on the commitment that this council made back in May of 2022, or we can hand wave it away saying that it's too hard, do the bare minimum, and eventually follow the lead of others, but only after we've continued to suffer the consequences. As far as this budget day, Acorn Hamilton has the following requests for council. There's 4. 1, prioritize moving the max heat bylaw forward as the 2025 budget is discussed. 2, expand and extend the air conditioner pilot project until the max heat bylaw is implemented and in full effect. 3, offer free transit on heat alert days. And 4, support budget needs for the renovation license and relocation bylaw, the rental housing protection bylaw, and the tenant support program. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your participation in this public process. Any further questions? Any questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you again. Our next delegate is also virtual, Jacqueline Wilson.
Thank you very much.
Hello. You have 5 minutes. You'll hear a ding at the 4th minute mark just to advise you of you're into your last minute. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Jacqueline Wilson, and I'm a lawyer at the Canadian Environmental Law Association. We're a province-wide legal aid clinic, and we focus on issues that affect environmental justice and environmental health. We've been working with the local legal aid clinic, environmental groups, tenants' rights groups, disability rights groups, and advocacy groups working on behalf of seniors to urge the City of Hamilton to adopt a maximum temperature bylaw that would apply to all rental units and set a maximum temperature of 26 degrees indoors, and to fund policies and programs in now Budget 2025 to support the implementation of the policy. I want to reiterate that this is an urgent health and safety issue. Climate change is here and it's getting worse. And the impacts of climate change are also very unfair. In our communities, extreme heat is particularly worrisome because it's so dangerous. It's been identified as the deadliest weather-related event. And it's especially dangerous for seniors, for children and infants, for individuals with chronic illnesses, with people with mobility challenges, people that are socially isolated or live in what are sometimes called materially deprived or low-income neighborhoods. And it's tenants that bear the brunt of this in terms of extreme heat indoors because they're often unable to control the temperatures within their own units. The health risk really escalates when it's looking like prolonged exposure to high indoor temperatures. The BC coroner's report after the awful 2021 heat event, when 619 people died, found that people were most in danger when the indoor temperature was above 26 degrees throughout the event. So we need to move forward with a mandatory limit, but also with policies that tackle that problem head on. It's the indoor temperatures and prolonged exposure indoors in people's homes. That's the biggest risk. My colleague from Hamilton Acorn discussed some of this, but in the timeline of where we're at in Hamilton, Hamilton declared a climate emergency about 5 years ago in 2019. And Hamilton's climate change impact adaptation plan in 2022 identified in Action 3.3 that it was looking to coordinate local efforts to address excessive indoor temperatures in rental housing. The motion that my colleague referred to, BOH 23019, was passed in 2023 by the Public Health Committee and ratified by the Council. And it directed the Licensing and Bylaw Services Division to prepare an information report identifying, at the time, 2024 policies and timelines for developing an adequate temperature bylaw. The people most impacted by extreme heat have now endured another 2 summers in Hamilton since the motion was passed, the summer of 2023 and the summer of 2024, without protections indoors in their apartments where it's most needed. And so we want to ensure that funding is set aside in this budget to make sure that these policies can move forward before this summer. Our budget requests are looking then at setting the standard, of course, which doesn't cost money, but to help implement that standard, we would be looking for money for property standards inspectors to assist with the initial years in implementing the policy. We also think it would be useful to look at funding assistance for landlords upgrading their buildings. So although our request and the standard that's set is technology agnostic, we would urge the city to include in this budget funding assistance for landlords to make upgrades that are environmentally friendly. So looking at heat pump technology instead of traditional air conditioners, looking at energy efficiency upgrades, better insulation, weather stripping. And those funding requirements could include terms not to pass along costs to tenants. We're also looking for funding for free transit on extreme heat days. Transit is mobile cooling, and it also will help people access resources that they need to cool down. And continued expansion of the free air conditioning units for eligible low-income residents. That's my delegation. Thank you very much. Tenants need an affordable unit to live in. We understand that. We appreciate the complexity of this policy, but they also need to be safe in their homes. And tenants most vulnerable to heat simply can't wait another summer. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation here today. Delegate Wilson, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you again for your participation. We have Stacey Easton, an in-person delegation next. The delegate is just making their way to the podium. Good afternoon.
Hey, thanks for being good with the pronouns. I guess I have a small reputation. So I'm just going to think of sort of slightly outside of the box and larger questions about this as opposed to a direct policy, because I've been in Hamilton for 9 years now, and this has been the hardest year I've been in Hamilton, and I don't know what's next. So I am disabled, but I also do disability history as a profession. And one of the things that disability history teaches us is asking a few questions. When we're telling stories, who is missing, who speaks and who doesn't speak, who has the power and who is speaking and who doesn't speak, and what forms of language to exist to police these rules. And how's the money spent? And this is a conversation consistently. And I've been in a lot of councils and board meetings, and I've done this once or twice before. And there's not a lot of people who are actually citizens. It's always sort of mediators through a kind of poverty industry. And I'm thinking about that a lot, and I think about the buildings that collapsed, the heritage buildings that collapsed this week, and how that becomes a very explicit metaphor for the collapsing social services. And I think about the sort of far right who has come into this town and actual Nazis who are showing up, and how that is also a metaphor, who we are allowing in this space, not in this space, in this town, in this city. And I think that there's this expectation consistently that we have sort of personal narratives instead of data, that we talk about feelings. But I think that there's also a number amount of data that would suggest that we need to prioritize and think about what we're prioritizing. Safe use sites, for example, and I'm really glad the YMCA has a safe use site in there, but I hear moral panic about drug use, and I don't hear about how safe use sites do a good job at reducing that, or a housing first strategy. For example, when Matt Francis uses the phrase, quote, Hamilton is a mecca for homelessness, when that has been consistently disproven. Homeless people aren't coming here. Or bike lanes, we hear words like war against the car, when the data is consistently a rise in pedestrian deaths. So what language are we using? Who is allowed to speak, and how are they allowed to speak? I think it's a question we have to ask consistently. And in the same capacity, who keeps us safe and how are they keeping us safe? I'm I'm in these spaces where consistently we say yes to the police funding all the time. We think the police make us safe, and being queer in this space, recognizing there's a history of the police to not make us safe. Why are we keeping funding things that don't necessarily keep us safe? And I think it's a lack of imagination. I think that we don't acknowledge the poor have autonomy, that the poor have a space they're allowed to make choices for themselves. And I think it's also a question of problems of disgust. The language that I hear consistently about lesser housed people is language the theologian Mary Douglas would talk about as language of disgust. That's one quote. That we do not treat them like people. There's this consistent dehumanizing instinct of this refusal to acknowledge those who need our help as anything. I've got a minute, right? Okay, as anything but real. And I think, I'm going to say one last thing, that I feel like these conversations are around danger, like the security money that the Y is getting. But as Sarah Schulman, 2 quotes, I'm sorry, feeling one is in danger does not mean that one is in danger. And I think we have to have that consistent conversation. Again, who is in danger, who is in power, and how are we using that power? I think there's a number of conversations where money going in is obviously not working, and so what happens if we try something else? What happens if we think consistently about the world that it could be? And I don't know what happens if we do that, but I think that we need to have that conversation, have those considerations. I know that I'm supposed to do something direct and explicit, it's just not who I am, but when considering budget, who has the power and who doesn't, and how we are pursuing power and who we're allowing to speak and not speak, I think are questions that have to be consistently considered. That's where I'm at. Thank you. Oh, there's
Thank you, Delegate
questions.
Easton. Are there any questions of Delegate Easton? Seeing none, thank you for your participation. Delegate Jeff Nevin of Indwell, in-person delegation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Nevin, and I'm here to talk about the budget and dollars going into housing. I'm the CEO of Indwell, and this year I was pleased to read $158 million in the budget towards housing and homelessness. Indwell provides supportive housing to over 550 people here in Hamilton, and Hamiltonians are familiar with our work. When we move people into housing, they stay housed. We have a 94% housing stability rate. And when people move in, they get to remove the label of homelessness and leave that at the threshold of their door. And people visit emergency rooms 50% less when they move in. And when they do, it's because it's a medical emergency. Our multidisciplinary support teams wrap supports around individuals and support people to meet their goals and hopes and ambitions. And people make assumptions about where the city's housing budget is going to. And I get asked regularly, and even from some of you, how much of this is going to Indwell? And I think it's a reasonable question that I'd like to unpack here. Last year, Indwell received a total of almost $1.4 million, or put it another way, that works out to about $7 per person per day for the folks that we provide supportive housing to. $7 per diem. By contrast, many municipalities, including Hamilton, are instead of permanent affordable supportive housing, moving towards a temporary housing solution in tiny cabins or sheds, and that cost across most municipalities is somewhere between $140 and $180 per person per day. I continually hear from community leaders that supportive housing is too expensive and it takes too long to build, and therefore we can't consider it. So let's dive in a little deeper into these numbers. When we dig into the funding going to Indwell, most of the funding is actually rent subsidies that flow through the city from higher levels of government. By my count, Indwell received approximately less than $100,000 that's directly from the Hamilton levy last year. That works out to about 40 cents per person per day to provide housing and support services at Indwell. I am pleased that that City Housing Hamilton, the City of Hamilton, and Indwell have partnered together to open 24 units of housing on King William, and these supports are in this upcoming budget, so thank you. And our commitment, Indwell's commitment to you, is to work to have these health support costs rightfully transferred to the Provincial Ministry of Health for funding. This project is a good example of what's possible, but unfortunately 24 units is just not enough. In addition to costs, I'd like to inform you about what Indwell and our supporters are bringing to Hamilton by means of direct donations and investments. Over the last 5 years, our supporters have donated $8.1 million in cash donations and another $3 million in gift-in-kind donations for our capital projects. Most recently, you might have heard that Trinity Lutheran Church sold us their building for $1 million less than the appraised value. $1 million donation right there. Together, that is $11.1 million in capital donations to affordable housing in Hamilton that has been given and entrusted to Indwell. In addition, each year, our supporters donate $1.7 million in operating donations to our Hamilton programs. So when I compare that, for every dollar that the property tax levy puts into Indwell's supportive housing right here in Hamilton, our supporters put in $40. Not to mention the tens of millions of provincial and federal funding that we have been able to attract to Hamilton. So I think it's fair to say it's very cost effective for Hamilton taxpayers. In regards to It Takes Too Long, we have 3 projects, 105 units that can be opened within 18 to 24 months, and 3 more projects with an additional 250 or more units that are right behind these in the pipeline. The best time to start building is today. Unfortunately, there are only 15 units of supportive housing by our entire sector under construction right now in the city. And it is time for the budget to reflect the critical need and the shortage of supportive, permanent housing as basic infrastructure. Our sector is ready to go, and our sector knows how to leverage private investment and investment from senior levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Nevin. Are there any questions? Recognize Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me when I'm a little bit confused. So I heard $1 million earlier in the presentation. Where's that $1 million coming from?
It's 1.4 million that comes through the city to us, but most of that is provincial programs, housing programs, so it's not coming from the property tax base. They're cost-sharing programs. So in my count, and I'd be happy to be corrected.
Exactly what I've been asking for was cost sharing between the province, the city, and the feds. So that's where the 1.6 is coming from?
Through the chair, 1.4 million.
Yes.
And by my account, 100,000 of that is from the local tax base, and the rest is from senior levels of government. That's coming to Indwell.
So I guess the question I have would be the responsibility for supportive housing has and continues to be the province and the feds. And we're a smaller player. If you look at what the province is providing this municipality, 28.6 million versus over $100 million we're spending on housing and homelessness. So our stats are a little bit different than what you're providing. Thank you.
Are there any further?
I'm not sure if that was a question.
Yeah, would you like to respond? And let's just hypothesize that it was a question.
Through the chair, and if my numbers are incorrect, I'd happily receive a correction from staff. I think another way to look at it is the province and feds are really in a race to be last to the table. And if the municipality gets first to the table, it's impossible. And it's, I think Indwell is an example of what's possible, how to leverage municipal funds to bring in private, provincial and federal funding into Hamilton to solve the encampment and homelessness issue.
Thank you, Delegate Nevin. Councillor Clark, did you have a further question?
I think we're getting to the same place. So what you're asking is that the city be the first to the table in order to leverage a third. In order to leverage money from the province and from the feds, the municipality has to indicate a willingness to be at the table with dollars.
Delegate Nevin, did you wish to reply?
Just for clarity,
yes,
there's less than $100,000 from Hamilton property taxpayers in Indwell's budget of about 15 million here locally in Hamilton. So it's not anywhere near a third. It's a very small.
Yeah, I don't dispute that, but we have been pushing for that consistently as a municipality. And we have been spending excessively on housing and homelessness without the province and the feds being at the table. And that's why we see this weird dichotomy where, you know, on homelessness, they're giving us $28.6 million and they're celebrating, and as it is an all-time record that they're providing this funding for homelessness, this is the province now, and yet the municipality on housing and homelessness is well above $100 million. And we're getting 28 from the province. So we are kicking above our weight. And I understand that Indwell may not, well, we have a difference of facts in terms of the numbers. I understand what Indwell is saying in terms of how much they're getting out of this process. But I think it's important that we clarify how much the municipality is spending on housing and homelessness, albeit not sufficient to Indwell's support of supportive housing.
Yep.
Chair?
Thank you. I think in terms of our queries to the delegate, we're here to seek clarification of that which he spoke. Perhaps we can hold our questions about the formula that is driving and guiding us and the role of local, the role of provincial, the role of federal on a macro or even a specific basis.
That's appropriate ruling. Forgive me for my passion, but we have been fighting is the wrong word, advocating for so long to the province on a third on housing, on supportive, on everything. And we're barely getting there. And so my apologies to.
If I may, through the chair, respond?
Of course, Mr. Evans.
I would agree with you. And my point of delegating today is to let you know that supportive housing works, and it rightfully puts the onus of the supports and the healthcare supports in the province's hand. And my encouragement would be to focus on supportive housing as a solution to encampments and homelessness. It's the best way to do that, and really to challenge the perception that Indwell's getting all the money, to challenge the perception that this is too expensive and too long to make happen.
And just one last, it's more of an affirmation. I attended the tours of Indwell with 2 ministers, and the provincial government is very positive about Indwell, and so it's been frustrating that we're not getting that supportive housing partnership going so that we can get more units online. So I think we share that point. Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation and for your clarification. Thank you, Chair. Again, my apologies for veering into debate.
Thank you. We have Councillor Pauls, followed by Councillor Cretch, Jackson, and McMeekin. Councillor Pauls is behind you.
Thank you, and thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Jeff. I also been to your community and the Indwell, and it's amazing. But I was taken aback how much money you actually raise from your community. You said 11.1 donation, which is amazing. These people really believe in what you're doing. My question is, the 3 projects, and then you said another 250 units, where are they now? Are they almost finished? And which one is just starting? Can you just explain those 3 projects for me?
Yes, through the chair. We have 3 projects that are ready for construction. One, the building permit's ready. Others are right behind that. 2 are in Ward 2. One is in Ward, 2 are in Ward 3, and 1 is in Ward 4. These projects are held up in this confusing spot of getting the capital stack ready to go, and then further by being able to apply for Ministry of Health funding. And that's one of the challenges that we have. You can't apply for Ministry of Health funding unless it's within the year or the coming up year. And when you're talking a year and a half to get the building built, it's one of the challenges. So you essentially have to build them on spec and then go after the province after that. And these 3 projects are held up with just missing a funding commitment to close the gap. And that can happen. We're working really hard to make that happen. It can happen through philanthropy. It can happen through a municipal commitment to cover the gap should the province not come through. Or it could be covered by the province or the federal government. But it's, again, I use the phrase, the race to be last to the table is really the challenge in those 3. The other 3, if we had a commitment of funding, we could really invest the dollars into moving those projects forward. You probably have heard where those some of those are. Trinity Lutheran Church is in Ward 4, and Century Manor is, I think it's in Ward 8 that we've recently purchased the property from the province. So the challenge really with supportive housing is to be able to get those projects to go forward and to close the gap, or to have somebody provide the certainty so that our board can go forward. On each of those projects, our board and our supporting community is spending $2 to $3 million to get them to the construction ready where we can apply for federal funding. And then once they're about to open, we can apply for Ministry of Health funding. And that order is really the challenge.
I appreciate that, Jeff, and I know where you're coming from. I think the supporting housing that's in Dwell is next to none. You do it all over Ontario. I know you have some in London, St. Thomas, somewhere else as well. And yeah, this is something we need to do and move forward. So it's so important to do that. So I thank you for coming and sharing. Thank you.
Councillor Cretch, please.
Thanks very much for your presentation. You talked a little bit about sort of timelines and costs, and so I wanted to dig into that a little bit. You're part of a coalition called Hamilton is Home, and so I'm sure you know that the city tries its best to spread money out to all the different housing providers. And you have a bit of line of sight to that. Is the city doing an equitable job of that, or are you saying that Indwell is sort of not receiving as much commensurate to other people, or could you identify that or explain that a little bit more clearly?
Through the chair, I'd probably answer that in 2 ways. So one is supportive housing is not getting the funding that it needs, and that would be us. It would be other supportive housing providers, developers within the Hamilton is Home Coalition. Second, the term equity would, if it means that everybody gets the exact equal amount, is actually one of the challenges to creating housing. We have different assets and abilities than some other organizations that actually need more support. There are smaller organizations that don't have the mechanisms for cash flow, and so they need, support from year one dollars. I don't need the cash in year one. We have in this community, it took us 10 weeks to raise $6 million in a social impact bond to help us with the cash flow of construction. So that's where we need to not necessarily deal with us as equal as you would with, let's say, a wonderful organization like Sacagawea. They need a funding commitment in year one. If I have a funding commitment for year two or for year three, as long as it's a commitment, our supporters will use our own investment to get us across the finish line. And so I would actually say, don't deal with us equally. Deal with some of the organizations that need different types of support, and maybe in that way we can all succeed.
No, thanks. My question was about equity, so you answered it, not about equality, so thank you. A couple questions about costs. I remember maybe almost 10 years ago now, the cost to build one unit of deeply affordable housing was around $150,000 to $200,000 in that window, and now we're looking at something closer to $600,000. But since we have you here, could you talk about what it costs right now to build one single unit of deeply affordable housing in the model you have?
Through the chair, our numbers, there's good news right now. It's good news for us. The building industry has really stopped building new units. So we're finding trades are more available. Costs, I wouldn't say they're necessarily coming down, but they've plateaued. And that's good news for us. It's not good news for the construction sector that's laying off labor that we really need to stay in the sector and come back in the next couple of years. The good news for us is I think we have a window of opportunity. There's not a week that goes by that a developer or a contractor is not calling me, trying to sell me land, or try to hire us to build our buildings because they have excess capacity and their numbers aren't penciling out. So I think we have an opportunity right now. We just did a project in Mississauga, and we came in $1 million under budget from what we had projected. Our numbers that were typically is around, in Hamilton, is around $500,000 a unit. We're able, as we move into southwestern Ontario, like London area, and depending on the incentives, we're able to bring that down into about $450,000 a unit range. Depends on the size of the unit. I'm talking about one bedrooms. So if you're talking 2 or 3s, that would go up from there.
Thanks. And how much does it cost to sustain the unit year over year on average? Because of course, when you're providing supportive housing, there's costs associated with providing those supports.
I have those numbers right here, so just bear with me for 1 second. The total costs, and I'm talking about the housing costs and the multidisciplinary team, so that's nurses, addictions workers, housing support, food security, all those. So on our, what we call our standard support, so that's people that are largely able to live independently, and that's what we see. People are coming into our enhanced support programs, typically out of homelessness, and they're stabilizing and they're thriving and they're moving towards what we call standard support. So so just some numbers on it's about $95 per person per day in our highest support program here. For our highest acuity across the organization, it's $175 per person per day. And at the standard level is $27.50 per person per day. And so when you average that out, because people start to thrive and to flourish, and they move towards more independence, and so across the board on average, it's about $90 per person per day to provide the affordable housing and the supports. And when I give that number, that's the part that we need from that would assume that tenants are paying about $550 in rent on top of that.
Sorry, I'm just writing some of these figures down, pardon me. I'm doing some quick math. So it's around $33,000 a year. The costs at the kind of mid-level, $90 a day over the course of a year. Thank you. My last question for you is about the processes you go through. You talked about matching. Councillor Clark talked a little bit about this, but usually, or sometimes I should say is a more fair word, sometimes the municipality needs to help you unlock funding from the provincial and federal governments by just simply being there, right? Meaning we have to choose amongst all the different projects that are there. We sort of say, okay, these are the projects we're going to put forward as part of our application to the federal provincial government. Well, the money comes from them. We're still participating in that process. So have you figured out how that's been beneficial to Indwell, been beneficial generally in the sector in terms of what we're doing? Because I know it's not necessarily quantified in the way you're speaking about the $100,000, but without the city there as that kind of lever, then you can't quite access funding in some ways. Is that my best understanding?
Yeah, through the chair, that is a challenge, is who's, I'll give you an example. To get federal affordable housing dollars, they require that your budget balances. But you can't apply for the provincial health dollars until the building is close to opening, and then your budget's not going to balance. So in order to get the federal dollars, we need to have somebody come forward and be hold that place in working with a smaller municipality. A smaller municipality said, "Yep, on a project to make sure the books balance, we're going to commit to a $10 million investment, and we're going to work real hard to make sure that we don't pay a dollar that, and actually we're going to work together, arm in arm, to go after the province to help fund that with the intention that the municipality would pay almost none of that." But it's the guarantee that is the really, I really appreciate you pointing at that, because it's the guarantee that we need to be able to convince our board that the risk of building on spec and that the various levels of government will come on at their appropriate time is worth the risk taking.
Last question for me. Just wanted to ask you about a comment you made that I think we hear about quite a bit, but we don't necessarily have the time to unpack, and while you're here, you might as well do it. One of the big issues for building affordable housing is that you start out with a cost of, let's just say, $30 or $40 million to do something. But then by the time the project actually finds its way in these 18 to 24 months you projected, the costs go up. So I know part of that is trying to assess how much you think something's going to cost, like you do budgeting, and you try to figure out what's really going to cost, and then the actuals later on. But can you explain why there's such a big gap? Because I think one of the problems with taking on new projects is we're still paying for stuff that's underway all the time, right? And then we get it, we think it's going to be there, and then bang, there's an increase in costs, and that delays us from taking that money and investing it somewhere new because we're still paying for the project that we funded 2 years ago. Right? We're stuck in that cycle sometimes of paying for projects that we funded or assisting in projects that we're trying to fund because the cost overages are high. So I guess I'm trying to understand from your perspective, how do we get these such high cost overages that become significant enough that we have to invest funding in them?
Through the chair. Indwell has about 30 buildings, and we have a lot of experience with that, and it really comes down to your ability to, obviously we can only predict so much about the future. Right now, we would be predicting, a relatively flat line in terms of what we're budgeting for a building to be open in 18 months compared to the cost today. In the past, we would be budgeting about an increase of about 1% a month on construction costs over the last 10 years, but that's changed. So good budgeting and then very good project management. So we do our own project management, and we have a lot of experience in that. And like I said, our recent experience has been coming in under budget. Just use the example in Mississauga as one of our last projects. It became $1 million under budget. So that's not our experience.
Okay, thanks very much for the answers to my questions, and thanks for your delegation today.
Thank you. We have Councillor Jackson, followed by Councillor McMeekin. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Budget Chair Wilson. And CEO Nevin, I listened to carefully, and I hear a person of immense pride of the work that Indwell is doing in our community. And so full applause from this ward office sincerely to you and your team. Can I just get a couple of things clarified, please? Number one, then, are you basically asking the municipality to at least sustain what we're providing at this time because of the leveraging you've spoken about with private donors and senior levels of government? Or are you intimating very respectfully to up our game? Through you, Budget Chair Wilson, just to get that clarified, please.
Through the chair, thanks for the question, request for clarification. So one is to say thanks, first of all. We appreciate every dollar that we receive. And to say thanks for the partnership on King William. I think it's a good partnership. So we're hopeful that that continues. And to let you know, our commitment is to actually reduce that number together by transferring some of those operating funds to the province, and our commitment to work together with the city to make that happen. And the third piece would be to say the only way we're going to get out of the encampment and homelessness situation is if we create supportive housing. All the research shows that people are homeless because we're in a housing crisis. And as the resource gets more scarce, those with the most vulnerabilities, perhaps it's least income, most disabilities, least amount of networks, connections, those folks are the ones who don't have the ability to compete and are ending up in tents. And so we can prevent homelessness with housing those who are living with permanent disabilities. We can prevent encampments, and we have a track record of moving people directly out of encampments into permanent supportive housing that works.
I'll take that in my own words as a subtle, Tom, if you could kindly up your game, that would also help further, okay? Secondly, and this is because I have listened carefully to Budget Chair Wilson, to a variety of housing experts that have come in, especially during this new term of this new council. And they've talked about the housing continuum from one end to the other. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, CEO Nevin, and I'll apologize. Are you suggesting that ideally, Tom, supportive, sustainable, permanent housing is ultimately the way a society should go? Are you suggesting then that it's maybe possibly misguided that the municipality is putting X amount of dollars towards 192 additional shelter beds in the interim and or 40 cabins at a sanctioned site? And again, I'm saying all this respectfully. This is not like a trap question at all, CEO Nevin. I'm trying to understand your ultimate ideal, what Inwell does, but am I detecting that you're suggesting that ideally, Tom, those 192 shelter beds, temporary interim, the 40 cabins at Tiffany Barton, temporary interim, give us the additional money and we could do more? And that's my last question, Budget Chair Wilson. And I hope that was asked respectfully.
Through the chair, let me unpack that in a couple of different ways. I live in Ward 3. By my count, there's about 150 of my neighbors that sleep outside every night. Those folks need help right now. And sheltering people in whatever way we can is the right thing to do. Okay. But if we don't look at a permanent solution, we're going to have to continue to grow our shelter system and grow how many tiny cabins we have. And so if that is a solution for right now, absolutely we should be investing in current approach to, we have a crisis and we need investment in that. And we need to be looking down the road. And 18 months to open supportive housing is not that long when we compare it to other infrastructure. You asked a much broader social policy question about where this should be and what's the right number. I started my career at Indwell as a volunteer, actually, when we were on Locke Street way back in 2000. And back then, the housing allowance, when someone was on Ontario Disability Support Program, provided people with an adequate ability to purchase housing at the low end of market. We've lost something. We've heard experts talk about for every unit we've created of affordable housing in Hamilton, you'd probably have the number better than me, but I think we've lost 28 units of affordable housing, mostly out of the bottom end of the market. If people had an adequate income to be able to purchase from the market, that would be a really great thing. I would be very pleased if the market could provide even 20% of our waiting list housing to at least even 20%. But the reality is the gap between what people have today at $535 for their housing allowance, and we just saw the numbers from other delegates about the cost to provide housing, is about $1,500 a month gap between what people have and what it costs to get into the market. And as such, we as a nonprofit sector are here to step in that gap and work hand in hand with all of you around the horseshoe here to find solutions. And we want to make sure that we have current solutions for people living in tents tomorrow. And we want to make sure that we stop the number of people that are ending up in tents and get people out of tents permanently, and that's through supportive housing.
Thank you for the sincerity and genuineness of your comprehensive response, CEO. Thank you, Budget Chair Wilson.
Thank you. Councillor McMeekin, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll be brief. Jeff, I've known you for a long time. Subtlety has never been your forte. Straight shooter. And I went back at you first. I want to say thank you for what you and your colleagues are doing. And you've taught me a lot over the years. Thank you for that as well. My question is a simple one. It may be on the minds of some here. You know, different groups have different ways of measuring success and defining who the broad base of supporters are. You are exceptionally fortunate, and you referenced some of your foundational money and the $1 million impact bond that recently, et cetera. What's the secret? What's the secret to generating 11 plus millions of dollars from private partners to do really important civil things? What's the secret?
Delegate Nevin, do you want to share your
Through the
secret
chair,
sauce?
this isn't us. This isn't me, this isn't Indwell, this is us. I look around this circle, and many of you councillors personally donate. And Councillor Jackson, you talked about, you know, our people. No, it's our people. It's the city of Hamilton that says, enough's enough. We don't want our neighbors living in tents. We want people to have stable housing, a door they can lock, a place to hang up their suit jacket so they can go to work, and a place where you can have an address so you can get to a doctor's appointment and deal with maybe the mental health or the addictions issues that you might have or the other challenges in life. We started here in Hamilton 50 years ago. And the secret is, it's the DNA of Hamilton is in us. We're gritty, we're grassroots, we don't wait for somebody else to come and bail us out. We say, what do we have? It started with a family that had an empty bedroom and started taking people in who were being discharged from psychiatric hospital.
I remember.
And we just start with that. What do we have? What can we contribute? How do we find solutions? And we hold that openly. And so around the question of equity, it doesn't have to be Indwell. If it's the YWCA, if it's Sacagawea, fund them, please. We have amazing organizations in the city. And I think that's the piece for us too, is we hold any information that we know, we hold that open. We work with transparency, and we work as a close partner to find solutions. And I think Hamilton trusts us. And I know that some of you, those of you who donate personally, you trust us. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that. And I think that's really the secret, is that we're not some unknown entity. We are Hamilton. We are Hamilton putting our values where we believe they need to be.
So none of us is as smart or as wise as all of us, and it starts with declaring a crisis and working together from there. Is that what you're saying?
Through the chair, it's personal. It's personal when our neighbors are living in tents.
Yeah, right on.
And so, of course, we start there. What did they say? I think you taught me this, Ted, that all politics is local. And someone else might have said that too, but you reminded me of that. And so we connect with our neighbors, and we reach out through our values of what we know is important to each of us, and we find solutions. And so I would say it starts with the values.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nan, followed by Councillor Wang. Councillor Nan?
Thank you, through you, Chair Wilson. Thank you, CEO Nevins and neighbor in Ward 3 for coming to delegate today, but also for stating unequivocally the value and impact Indwell brings to our city as a whole. Your organization has given us a lot of deliverables in terms of tackling the housing and homelessness crisis in our community, but also another partner to work with, not only through the Hamilton is Home Coalition, but also through our Housing Secretariat. So thank you to yourself, your organization, all of its volunteers, and yeah, you're mission driven and it shows. I just wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly, and if I can get this out and then you can tell me whether or not I did, I would appreciate it. So what I'm hearing you say in response to my colleagues as well as your initial delegation is that right-sizing investments along the entire continuum inside of an ever-growing crisis is the challenge that the city needs to face, and you're highlighting it for our 2025 budget. Shelters now for our emergency needs, supportive housing like the partnership we're doing with City Housing Hamilton at King William that received federal funding, Rapid Housing Initiative funding, where the city is covering all of the operational costs until the ministry agrees to assume them, to RGI units like the ones that you already have undergoing and you have built in our community, to the various other definitions of affordable housing for renting and home ownership. Did I get you right in terms of that is the balance of investments? Those are the stages in which the municipality is needing to prioritize investment in 2025?
Through the chair, absolutely, we need housing of all types. And I would argue that those with the most vulnerability need particular attention and focus. And those are folks who need deep rental subsidies. And those are folks who have additional barriers to being able to find housing in the market. So I would suggest that while each of those is important, it depends on which solution or which issue we're trying to tackle. And if we're trying to tackle particularly encampments, we really need to create supportive housing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just fresh off of what Councillor Nan was going with, I think for me, I'd like to really understand, and I'm going to be a straight shooter here. Earlier in your delegation, you said Hamilton only provides $100,000 of funding in a budget of $15 million, I think, something to that effect. So what is your ask here? I know you're advocating on behalf of an entire spectrum, but what is Indwell's ask here, just so that I have a sense of a number that I can put in the back of my head as we go into budget deliberations on specifically what Indwell is asking for?
Through the chair, I think the biggest thing I'd be looking for is partnership. Okay. Understanding our what is the gap that keeps all these projects from going forward, and collaboratively trying to solve that gap. Is it a guarantee that we work to get so that projects can apply for senior levels of funding? What's the gap? Obviously, funding is crucial, and there's different ways to solve that. We need your support to move these projects with 6 projects in the pipeline. I should also mention one of those projects that I failed to mention earlier when the councillor asked is actually in Ward 2, the Jamesville project that we also are partnering with. So I should have mentioned that. We need help to leverage the provincial and federal funds. And so today, I'm not asking for any specific dollar. I'm asking for a partnership and a commitment to move supportive housing forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Delegate Nevin, thank you so very much for sharing your experience. I will say that in my experience, I appreciate the counsel that you provide us and the direct insight, and clearly your success at fundraising is a measure of the confidence that the community has in you. And I know Mayor Horvath is continuous in her reminder that we are a generous community. We do feel the value and see the value in each and every single neighbor. So I always appreciate when she reminds us of that. And I appreciate the work you do in living that. So thank you. Okay, to my colleagues, we have one final delegation who has been waiting, and it is a virtual one, Claire Freeman from the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. Thank you for waiting and being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Rich discussion here. I really feel for all city councillors and how all the success of downloading has been put on you to care for residents. And it's such a shame. I heard what Jeff was saying around affordability. And I have to say, I remember when Harris government came in 1995 and cut Ontario Works 21%, and we've never actually reached that again. So part of our housing crisis is definitely affordability crisis. And when we have more people who need subsidized housing in order to stay housing, certainly we need to look up to our province and to the federal levels for what they do. So whatever kind of advocacy you can do to push those rates higher, it would be very, very appreciated to all citizens because people want to stay housed. We know that in the last couple of years, rents have gone up through the roof, and we've seen a number of people rent evictions and all kinds of things where folks just can't stay housed because they just can't afford it. So I thank you for your hard work in deliberating and trying to figure out what we're going to do here, because it's never been harder to be a city councillor, I think, in all the years that I've been working. But I originally came here today to really talk about something that I also need your leadership in, because I'm standing here alongside community partners ACORN and the Canadian Environmental Law Association to address the urgent issue that resonates deeply within our community, and it's a critical need to confront the challenges exposed to extreme heat, particularly affecting those who are most vulnerable, children, seniors, and those with complex medical conditions who disproportionately are in our cities areas that have heat islands. The issue of climate change is not new to this council, and I really appreciate that in 2023 you took the leadership to approve a maximum heat bylaw. And I really ask you to think about that in your deliberations for budget this year, and how can we actually implement it. I implore you to recognize the urgency of our current climate crisis, and I think we all see it around us. The recent release of a Global Meteorological Association State of Climate Services report in 2024 that was just released this month highlighted the frequency and intensity of climate extremes, floods, storms, and heat wave are escalating at alarming rates, and I think you can see all the flooding disasters just recently around the world. However, heat-related hazards tragically emerge as a leading cause of death of all of those things, representing 57% of all climate-related fatalities. So this is why we do need to take action again. As a great city with great grit, I know that. Living in extreme heat conditions can jeopardize your public health. It is a public health crisis, particularly for vulnerable, as I said. Many residents, particularly those on fixed income and during heat waves, are poorly equipped housings, and they're basically trying to survive. Hamilton is home to many older buildings situated in the urban heat islands, as I said, notably in the downtown industrial areas, the East End and North and Central Hamilton. Living in poorly insulated older structures within these heat islands amplifies both the heat intensity and the air pollution, exacerbating, sort of health risks. So really what we're asking for is, Hamilton has historically demonstrated leadership in this area, having passed a bylaw in 2007 to ensure that tenants have the right to a minimum temperature. It's only a provision that was officially put into the Residential Tenancy Act in 2019. So you can see that we're often ahead of the province. In 2016, Councillor Tom Jackson took a stand on behalf of senior constituents advocating for the City Council to acknowledge climate change by reducing the time landlords had to provide heat to their residents, because his residents were telling him in September it was too early to turn on the heat and they needed their air conditioning kept on. This effort led to the council approving the policy change, thus reducing the landlord's responsibility. So as we, navigate these heat challenges, and I understand that they cost money, but it also costs lives. And I know that we can work together. And so I want to stand with ACORN and the Canadian Environmental Law Association and their ask to this council. Please put some money aside to complete and phase in the maximum heat bylaw. I do know that there's lots of folks who will tell you that it can't be done, but I think Stuart showed you that we did do it in 2007 and our residents are better off for it. I do believe strongly in collaborating with other governments. We got to look up as a city. We got to, keep stopping just asking the taxpayer to pay all of the things that the feds and the province are not doing it. So we do need to look at how they can provide incentives to landlord to make their buildings green. We see that they do it sometimes, but we need them to do it on a more commercial level for people and not pass those increases on to folks. We need to expand the free bus tickets on extreme heats. It's very important. And then also, I do think we need to expand the amount of air conditioning units for those on ODSP who have health issues. I know we did it this year. And I can tell you, I also have worked in palliative care, and I have seen people who are with comorbidity health issues, and being able to breathe is incredibly important. And I've walked into some of those houses where there is no air conditioning going on, and I can absolutely tell you the quality of health is diminished. So please consider those things. And once again, I want to thank you all for being so conscientious about deliberating and really caring for the city. And I know it's really a tough time. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Freeman. Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Chair Wilson. Can I ask, how is the community legal clinic funded? I believe that you're mainly publicly funded through the provincial government, but also through the City of Hamilton?
We're funded through Legal Aid Ontario, so it's not actually funded by the government directly. And last year, you were as kind to allow us to continue to protect tenants with a tenant defense fund that looks at keeping people from being rent evicted, and also looking at group applications for folks. And we certainly hope that you look favorably upon that. You will see that we've already exceeded what we put out there as an amount that we were going to help protect tenants.
Thank you.
Tenants, as you know, I'll just add this. I mean, there's legislation that's happened in this province that took off rent controls to people. There's all kinds of reasons that folks are being really pushed out of their residence. And so we need to protect their rights as much as possible.
Thank you, Delegate Freeman. Councillor Danko?
Thank you. And just so I'm clear, Legal Aid Ontario is public funding.
It's funded through, they get a portion of their money through the government to provide, the legislated legal services that are required. And we're funded through them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic has a number of staff lawyers who are then, their salaries, activities are then funded through public tax dollars, through Legal Aid Ontario, and through the City of Hamilton.
Yes.
And of course, you're aware of the active court challenge against the City of Hamilton that is attempting to eliminate this municipality's ability to enforce our own tent encampment bylaw.
Councillor Danko, on the information provided by the delegate?
Well, this is a budget question. The delegate is presenting on the budget.
Would you like me to answer that question? Or is that, because that's not really actually what I'm here to. ask you to look at, so.
No,
But
it's not. Councillor Danko, could you reframe your question so it's within the parameters of what the delegate is here to delegate on, which is a budget delegation?
It is a budget delegation. I'm asking a budget question, and I would like to know what involvement the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic has in the active court challenge against the City Hamilton and city taxpayers.
Point of order.
Thank you. I'll recognize the point of order. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, Budget Chair. I understand the delegate was here to speak on heat bylaws and temperature-related bylaws specifically, and that was the aspect of the budget delegation of the delegate. I don't think that the round of questioning is in order and in line with your earlier parameter that we all chair with, which is not to engage in debate.
Thank you. I agree with the order. Councillor Danko, can you please redirect your question so it is within the domain of the subject matter which the delegate has brought to our attention and is advocating on behalf of?
If the delegate doesn't want to answer the question, that's up to the delegate, but I believe I'm in order asking a budget question.
No, I've made a ruling. If you don't agree with that ruling, you can certainly challenge it and look for the support of the chair. I've ruled the question out of order, is outside the domain of the delegation. Thank you. Do you have any further questions, delegate? Or Councillor Danko? Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, and through the chair, just wondering, the heat bylaw, where's the funding coming from? Isn't it coming from the climate change fund?
I don't know where you're allocating it, but I would, I think it's public health and from climate change. I don't know exactly your line of where you're taking it from.
Yeah, so therefore, it's going to take the funding that we give to the climate change and they're taking it to. So I just wanted to know if you knew where it came from, and I think it is. So thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
If I could just clarify, I know that the funds that come through the ODSP air conditioning, I think that comes through funding from your allocated for social assistance.
Councillor Pauls, do you have any additional questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you, Delegate Freeman, for participating in this public process and for sticking around. Thank you. Okay, that is our final delegate today. I need a mover and a seconder to approve all the delegate requests. It's moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor McMeekin. Can we please vote on that? Thank you. Thumbs up from Councillor Jackson and Councillor McMeekin and Councillor Spadafora. I feel like the romper room. I see. Oh, yes, thumbs up for me. Councillor Francis, are you with us? Mark him as absent, please. Awesome, that carries 14-0. Councillor Spadafora and Councillor Clark would like to adjourn this meeting. It's so moved. Please vote. Councillor Jackson and McMeekin have their thumbs up, as do I, as does Councillor Spadafora. Good night. That carries 14-0. Again, thank you to all the delegates who participated in this public process. Appreciate the time and the consideration you have given us and sharing with us your asks, your insights, and your time. We are adjourned.